A person may know many things, the names of stars, historical wars, laws of physics, but that alone doesn't make him dangerous. Knowledge does not turn someone into a force. The truth is, in this era, anyone can memorize thousands of facts with just a few taps on a screen. But what makes someone dangerously wise isn't the volume of what they know. It's how they govern themselves in the face of it all. A truly intelligent person doesn't speak much, doesn't try to impress, and has nothing to prove. They enter a room, observe in silence, and their presence is felt instantly, not because they argue well, but because they deeply understand themselves. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Build your inner citadel, a fortress no external force can breach." That is the beginning. Dangerous intelligence isn't about defeating others. It's about making yourself undefeatable. 1. Knowing is not enough. We live in an age where information is cheaper than ever. In just a few seconds, you can find the temperature on Mars, the history of a war from 2,000 years ago, or quotes from an ancient philosopher. And yet, the irony is that the more information we consume, the more lost we seem to become. We believe that knowing more is enough to be wise. But that's not how it works. Knowing is one thing, understanding is another. And acting based on that understanding, that's what real wisdom looks like. A person may read hundreds of books and memorize thousands of facts, yet still struggle with their own life. Still lose their temper over a thoughtless comment. Still procrastinate out of fear of failure. Still chase validation in the eyes of others, even when their mind is filled with lofty teachings. That is the gap between knowledge and the ability to live it. Knowing the theory is not enough. Knowing what should be done, but failing to do it when the moment arrives, that is not intelligence. Marcus Aurelius once emphasized, "Don't waste your time debating what a good man should be. Be one." Philosophy is not found on pages. It's in your behavior, in how you respond to rudeness, how you stay composed when misunderstood, how you persist when everyone else has quit. Today's world glorifies speed of absorption. Learn fast, understand fast, succeed fast. But the truly dangerous person is not the fastest learner. It's the one who digests what they've learned, reflects in silence, and transforms it into instinct when needed. They aren't overwhelmed by information because they've learned to discern what truly matters. They don't try to win arguments. They strive to act rightly in real life. They don't read to memorize, but to reshape how they see, how they live, and how they choose when standing at life's difficult crossroads. Marcus didn't study philosophy to win debates. He studied to survive temptation, pain, and the unimaginable pressures of being emperor. And you are no different. You don't need more information. You need depth. The clarity to distinguish noise from signal. The courage to pause, reflect, and act, instead of reacting like a machine on autopilot. Knowledge is not a weapon if you don't know when to use it. And intelligence isn't about saying the right things. It's about living rightly, silently, steadily, and consistently. When you grasp this, you begin shifting from knowing more to knowing enough, from being told to experiencing, from collecting ideas to practicing discipline. And when you do that, little by little, you don't just become smarter. You become formidable in a way no one can see with the naked eye. 2. The inner citadel, an impenetrable core. There is a kind of strength no one can see, no one can measure, and no one can steal. The strength of a soul that has been deeply tempered. The ancients called it the inner citadel, a place no harsh words, humiliating defeats, praise, or insults can penetrate. Marcus Aurelius wrote of it not as an unreachable ideal, but as a daily habit, a way of living honed over time. It is the ability to preserve inner order even when the outer world is in chaos and beyond your control. This citadel is not built of bricks or cement, but of small, consistent acts. A deep breath before responding to an insult, a simple nod instead of a harsh rebuttal when wrongly accused. A quiet evening writing down what you felt, rather than being swept away by emotion like waves in a storm. Each time you choose to hold your reaction instead of erupting, you lay a brick. Each time you choose reason over impulse, you raise the wall higher. And each time you ask yourself, is this within my control? You fortify the foundation. People often mistake calm for passivity, for coldness or submission, but to a Stoic, calm is the highest expression of self-mastery. It's the result of gaining control over the most fragile part of you. The part that wants to react immediately, that craves recognition, that trembles under criticism. When you master that part, you no longer need the world to be gentle with you. You don't need anyone to understand you, praise you, or treat you right. Because you've learned to treat yourself with fairness, to stay unmoved by what's outside, to accept what you can't control without bitterness, and to act decisively with what you can, without needing applause. The inner citadel doesn't shield you from life's turmoil. It simply keeps you from being swept away by it. You will still be hurt, but you will not fall. You will be misunderstood, but you won't need to explain yourself to everyone. You will fail, but you won't identify with that failure. You will feel the full range of emotions, anger, sorrow, envy, shame. But none of them will dictate your actions, and that makes you incredibly difficult to manipulate, provoke, or distract. The one who possesses an inner citadel makes the aggressor hesitate, unsettles the unstable, and causes even the loudest to step back, because they cannot figure you out. You don't react how they expect. You don't fight back on cue. You don't collapse as they predicted. You simply stand firm, observe clearly, know yourself, and respond. At the right time, in the right way. That's what makes you dangerous. Not because you pose a threat, but because you are no longer easily threatened. Marcus Aurelius lived through war, plague, betrayal, and loss. Yet in his journals, he never cursed the world. He wrote only about adjusting his thoughts, training his mind, and keeping his heart still in the storm. That is a lesson that never goes out of date. If you want to become impenetrable, don't look for a place to hide. Build a fortress within, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice, and let it guard you with a steadiness no one can take from you. 3. Emotional discipline. The rare kind of wisdom few dare to master. Among all the forms of strength a person can cultivate, there is one that is quietest, least noticed, and hardest to attain: emotional discipline. It isn't as flashy as knowledge, as easy to show off as accomplishments, or as praised as eloquence or decisiveness. Yet, it is precisely what separates those who control others from those who truly command themselves. A person with emotional intelligence is not someone who never feels anger, sadness, fear, or jealousy. Rather, it's someone who, even as these emotions rise, remains clear-headed enough not to be led by them. Have you ever been furious over a message, only to regret your reaction moments later? Have you ever felt emotionally shaken by a critique and remained stuck in resentment for hours afterward? This is all too common, because emotion is instinct, while discipline must be trained. Most people are swept away by emotion the moment it arises. They react before they think. They reply before they reflect. They pour everything boiling inside them outward, like a pot with no lid. But a Stoic lives differently. They learn to detect emotion as it arises, name it, look at it directly, and decide whether or not action is necessary. This is not denial or repression, it's a deeper form of intelligence, understanding that emotion is a signal, not a command. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Emotions cannot harm you unless you allow them to." This doesn't mean ignoring emotions, but learning to engage with them like a stern teacher, listening to understand, not obeying every whisper. When you feel hurt, ask yourself, what part of me feels threatened? When you're angry, ask, what boundary of mine feels violated? And when you're jealous, stop and ask, what does this reveal about the values I've been chasing? These are not easy questions to answer in the heat of emotion. But if you train regularly, you will develop a kind of distance, a small space between emotion and action. In that space lies freedom, choice, true power. A person with emotional discipline is not easily provoked, not easily drawn into pointless arguments, not easily swayed by attack or flattery. They don't aim to eliminate emotion, but to place it in its proper role, not at the wheel, only on the dashboard. As a result, they become hard to read. No one knows what they're thinking because they don't respond in predictable ways. But they're excellent at reading others because they've trained to analyze emotions from within themselves. That calmness is not coldness, it's a warm presence with intention. They don't hurt others with careless words, and they don't suffer at the hands of others' emotional manipulation. In today's world, where people explode over a post, envy a photo, and fall apart from a misplaced comment, emotional discipline is a form of intelligence that resists chaos. It doesn't come from learning more, but from practicing more. Not during moments of peace, but in the exact moments you want to lash out, flee, or rebel, yet choose stillness instead. Such people don't need to prove anything. They simply show up, and their steadiness becomes a kind of force that makes others pause and reconsider before acting. 4. Cultivating the art of silent observation. In a noisy room, where everyone is trying to speak louder to be heard, there's a type of person who chooses silence and observation. Not because they are timid, nor because they are passive, but because they know. The one who sees the full picture is often the one who says the least. Observation is not passive behavior. It is a deliberate, active act of inner strength. When you observe long enough without interrupting, you begin to see what others usually miss: the pauses between words, the subtle shifts in behavior, the tension between what's shown and what's hidden. Those who practice silent observation don't just hear what people say, they hear how they say it. They notice the uneven breath of someone anxious, the flicker in the eye of someone lying, the break in the voice when touching on fear. They are not distracted by the surface of speech, because they've trained themselves to hear what's unsaid. It's a sharp but quiet form of intelligence, not expressed in dazzling arguments, but in cold precision when reading people. In a world of hurried dialogue, those with refined observation hold the real advantage, because they understand others before others understand them. Stoic philosophy does not romanticize silence, but it elevates listening as a noble act. Epictetus once reminded us, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." When you take a step back to observe, you give yourself the chance to view things from a higher vantage, away from knee-jerk reactions. You are no longer carried by others' emotions, no longer easily steered by anger, flattery, or threats. You begin to see who is sincere, who is performing, who is manipulating, and who is simply afraid. Those who master silent observation don't need to ask many questions to uncover the truth. They don't extract information through interrogation. They let others reveal themselves through glances, tones, word choices, the inconsistencies between what is said and how it's acted. And because they don't speak too quickly, they become difficult to read, difficult to provoke, difficult to manipulate. In a world obsessed with speaking well, those who can see clearly become rare and powerful. Observation cannot be learned in a night. It demands full presence, inner stillness, and a disciplined refusal to react too quickly. When you sit quietly in a meeting, say nothing, and still sense who's withholding, who's uneasy, who's dishonest. At that moment, you possess an invisible weapon. No one hears it, but everyone feels it, because those who see more clearly will always move ahead, and those who speak less often understand more. Cultivating silent observation is how you sharpen your mind like a blade, not for show, but for that one decisive cut that makes everything clear. 5. Speech is a weapon. Use it only when necessary. In the modern world, where people speak more than they think, argue more than they observe, and react with words instead of choosing them, deliberate silence becomes a rare form of strength. The wise don't use words to show off, don't speak because they must, but speak because action is required. To them, words are not mere tools of communication, but weapons, sharp, intentional, and never to be used carelessly. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Don't waste time debating what a good person should be. Be one." In the same way, a Stoic doesn't try to speak well, they strive to live rightly. A person may dominate a meeting with endless words, exhausting others with information, or confusing them with complexity. But the truly intelligent will speak only at the right moment, with the right message and the right weight. They don't need lengthy explanations if a single sentence is enough to shift the situation. They don't speak to win debates, but to clarify what must be understood. And they don't speak to be heard, but to make others pause and reflect. That's why their words, though few, carry weight. Stoics understand that every word spoken is an action, and actions demand responsibility. So they don't use speech to vent anger, to attack, or to impress. They choose silence in the face of insult, not out of weakness, but because they know that impulsive reactions often cost us control. They speak only when certain that their words will bring necessary impact, not to prove themselves, but to illuminate the truth. The power of words doesn't lie in their volume, but in the depth of awareness behind them. A person with inner stability won't waste words. They don't try to convince with arguments, but let others see reason through the way they live. And because of that, every word they speak can serve as a direction, a boundary, or a wake-up call. They don't speak to lead crowds, but to awaken individuals who are lost. And because they speak so rarely, when they do, people truly listen. In debates, the most formidable person is not the one who speaks quickly, frequently, or sharply, but the one who sits calmly, listens to every argument, and after a brief pause, asks a question that forces everyone to reconsider the entire issue. This is not a tactic, it's depth. Not learned in a day, but forged through repeated moments of silence. The silence that precedes speech creates a boundary between the impulsive and the composed, between the easily manipulated and the self-possessed. A well-timed sentence can dissolve misunderstandings, end conflict, and light the way forward. But a poorly timed one can ignite hurt, division, and unforeseen consequences. Those who know this do not rush to speak. They observe, analyze, weigh, and speak only when their words can soothe, clarify, or reinforce truth. That's why their words carry weight without volume. They are weapons, used only when truly necessary, and when used, never wasted. 6. Sharp thinking, knowing when to stay silent. We often think sharp thinking means quick rebuttals, sharp words, tight logic, and leaving no room for counterattack. But in reality, the sharpest part of intelligence lies in the ability to stop. Not everyone is clear-minded enough to recognize that in many situations, silence is the clearest sign of mature thought. Because the truly understanding person isn't the one who always has to finish their point. It's the one who's refined enough to know when not to say more. To know when even a truthful statement would only complicate things. To know when silence is a strong enough answer to replace any defense. Those with sharp thinking don't react by habit. They hold space between provocation and response. They listen, observe, consider, then choose whether or not to speak. What makes them hard to read isn't layers of pretense, but the refusal to behave as expected. They don't play their part in predictable scripts. When attacked, they don't rush to defend. When slandered, they don't need to cry out to prove the truth. They don't need to win the momentary argument because they aim for long-term stability. They understand. A hasty reaction can often ruin a profound truth. So they hold to silence like a sharp blade, drawn only when truly necessary. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You don't have to have an opinion about everything." A simple sentence. Yet in today's world, where everyone is speaking, everyone has something to say, and everyone wants to prove they understand, choosing to say nothing becomes a deep act of resistance. Silence doesn't mean lack of conviction. It may be the way you protect inner peace, avoid needless conflict, and preserve energy for battles that matter. The sharply minded don't lose themselves in noisy situations. They don't get swept up in collective emotion. They remain clear enough to recognize they don't need to speak for others to understand, if doing so brings no real value. A timely question can redirect the course of a conversation. But a timely silence can reveal who's insecure, who's defensive, and who's manipulating. The grounded person chooses silence not because they know nothing, but because they've seen everything. They see through the surface of speech and understand. Not every word needs a response. Their silence isn't coldness, it's a kind of freedom. They don't scramble to fill every minute with words. They let others speak, then respond. And sometimes they don't respond at all, because their presence alone has already delivered the message. Sharp thinking doesn't lie in always having something clever to say, but in knowing the right moment to remain quiet. Because only when you're not pressured to speak can you truly think clearly. And the person who can think in silence is the one who can never be easily led. 7. Multi-dimensional thinking. Learn constantly. Understand everywhere. There is a kind of intelligence that cannot be measured by grades, counted by degrees, or confined to a single field. That is multi-dimensional thinking. Those who possess it don't learn to become experts, but to become adaptable, perceptive humans who can view things from many angles at once. They don't just study to excel, but to gain depth. And they don't read philosophy to quote it, but to find connections between large ideas and everyday moments. Marcus Aurelius was not only an emperor and a philosopher. He was also an observer of the world through many lenses. Politics, society, war, medicine, psychology, and deeply personal experiences like death, pain, and betrayal. He didn't read to be the best in one domain, but to respond correctly in any circumstance. Multi-dimensional thinking doesn't require you to know everything, but to see links between things that seem unrelated. Those who think this way don't view problems in absolute terms. They always ask, is there another angle? What am I missing? If I'm wrong, where might the flaw be? In a conversation, they can understand both the supporter and the critic. In a business decision, they consider not only profits, but social impact, psychological effects, and cultural depth. They read philosophy to build resilience, psychology to understand behavior, history to avoid repeated mistakes, and even novels to grasp the loneliness most people never admit. They understand that the world does not run on a single logic. It is complex, intertwined, and full of contradiction. And the more dimensions you can learn to see, the steadier you stand in the whirlwind of change. Multi-dimensional thinking doesn't demand that you know everything at once. It requires you to keep observing, keep learning, and never shut your awareness just because you've heard enough. A Stoic never stops learning. They learn from failure, from enemies, from silence, from betrayal, and from the smallest things, like the way someone breathes faster under stress or repeats the same response whenever criticized. To them, every moment in life is a lesson if you know how to observe and connect. And that's how they become the ones who can act while others are still trying to understand the situation. Multi-dimensional thinking isn't just for the highly educated. It belongs to anyone humble enough to face life's complexity. It begins by asking questions instead of making assumptions, listening instead of refuting, exploring instead of concluding. Such people are never mentally finished because there's always more to learn, always another angle to see. And when you can connect the pieces of the world into one coherent view, you don't just become wiser, you become quietly formidable. You understand everything without needing to declare anything. 8. A mind that cannot be controlled, the one no one commands. No one is born with an unshakable mind. The human mind is naturally fragile, easily swayed, prone to reflexes, and constantly influenced by external forces. From a cold glance, a careless remark, to the agitating headlines on social media. But the Stoic understands, if you don't learn to govern your own mind, someone else will, and usually they won't use it for purposes you would approve of. An uncontrollable mind doesn't mean a mind without feelings or thoughts. On the contrary, it is a mind that's always active, yet constantly asking, why do I think this way? Who benefits from me believing this? Is this the truth or just a story I've told myself? A free mind is not drawn in by fear or glamour. It doesn't get angry over a comment online, doesn't rush to agree just because a crowd cheers, and certainly isn't easily manipulated by messages designed to exploit its psychological blind spots. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, do not let your mind become a slave to anything outside of it. A simple sentence, but to live by it is a long journey. Because the modern world is designed to capture your attention. Every platform, every ad, every message you receive has one goal: to trigger your reaction. When you're angry, you share. When you're curious, you click. When you feel inadequate, you spend. Everything runs on the principle: seize your mind before you even realize it. A person with an uncontrollable mind sees through this game. They are not led by constant emotional signals. They recognize when they're being subtly provoked by sensational content or manipulative speech. They watch their reactions without rushing to believe them. They do not let the first emotion dictate the final decision. And most importantly, they know how to step out of that current and return to the most essential question: am I the one in control of this? When you master your mind, you are no longer prey to covert manipulation. You no longer feel pressured to speak up every time the world demands an opinion. You don't burn out trying to argue or prove anything. You can quietly step back, observe, filter, and respond with complete intention. Such people are hard to predict, hard to categorize, and especially hard to control. Because no one can use their mood to hijack your behavior anymore. A mind that cannot be controlled is the final fortress a Stoic builds within. It doesn't need to shout to prove freedom, doesn't need to argue against the world. It only needs to stand firm against temptation, attack, chaos, and the fears disguised as truth. And when you build that kind of mind, you become someone no one can control, not because you wish to dominate others, but because you've mastered yourself. 9. The power of presence. The one who brings calm. There are people who enter a room without saying a word, without seeking attention, without trying to impose, yet somehow their presence shifts the atmosphere. Not because they're powerful or flashy, but because they carry something rare, complete calm. It's an energy that cannot be seen but is felt by everyone. A quiet steadiness, a kind of gravity that naturally slows others down, draws their attention, earns their caution and respect. The person who holds this kind of power doesn't lack emotion. They've simply mastered their emotions to the point where they're no longer ruled by them. They don't react hastily, don't retaliate when provoked, and aren't swayed by praise or criticism. Their calm comes from within, shaped over years of discipline, constant observation, and the refusal to let external events rob them of their balance. They understand. The calmest person in the room holds the greatest power, not the power to control others, but to control themselves. Marcus Aurelius didn't need to shout to command, because he understood that true power doesn't lie in volume, but in the ability to stay rational when others lose their grip. Those with a powerful presence don't arrive to perform. They don't need to prove anything with words. They let the steadiness in their eyes, the slowness in their steps, and the strength in their breath speak for them. And because they don't chase attention, it comes to them effortlessly. In a chaotic world, people rush to react, rush to conclude, rush to prove right from wrong. But those with calm presence do not. They sit there, silent like an anchor in the waves. They aren't swept up by drama, aren't easily angered, and don't get pulled into unnecessary conflicts. They're the ones people turn to when things fall apart, because their steadiness becomes a compass in the storm. Not because they have all the answers, but because they can stay clear enough to ask the right questions. This kind of presence isn't innate. It comes from training yourself daily, staying silent when you want to erupt, observing when you want to react, thinking when others are still arguing. It's a kind of power that doesn't speak, but is always heard, and in a loud world, the one who brings calm is the one who causes everything else around them to quiet down. 10. Absolute self-control, the highest state of intelligence. There is no higher state of mind than complete mastery over yourself. Not mastery over others, not control over circumstances, but control over your own thoughts, emotions, words, actions, and choices in every situation, especially the hardest ones. The person who reaches absolute self-control is not someone who avoids challenges, but someone who doesn't lose themselves when the challenge arrives. They don't let the external world dictate their internal state. They live by principles, not by moods. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That seemingly simple idea touches the core of self-control, the ability to choose without being driven. You may be insulted, but you don't have to get angry. You may be challenged, but you don't have to respond. You may feel fear, but you don't have to run. That small space between emotion and action is where wisdom shows its strength. And when you train to widen that space, you're moving closer to true freedom. Absolute self-control doesn't mean you have to control everything in life. On the contrary, it begins when you let go of the need to control what's beyond your reach. You don't try to change others, you change your own reactions. You don't try to force life to fit your desires. You adjust your mind to live in harmony with what life brings. And in that adjustment, you find quiet power, not from domination, but from intentional surrender. The person who attains absolute self-control isn't easily shaken, doesn't need to perform, and doesn't chase praise or avoid blame. They live with an inner core as solid as stone, even when storms rage outside. They don't need to prove anything, because their presence is proof enough. And when you meet someone like that, you'll realize intelligence isn't measured by speed, but by silent depth. That kind of self-control is the highest form of wisdom, a peace no one can give you and no one can take away. To me, becoming dangerous does not mean becoming frightening to others, but becoming untouchable by the very things that once brought us suffering. It is the moment when you are no longer pulled by emotion, no longer allow others to define your worth, and no longer react unconsciously just to protect a fragile ego. A truly intelligent person has no need to prove anything because they are already whole within. They observe before speaking, choose to act rather than react, and place discipline above fleeting emotion. They don't seek to win arguments, but choose long-term victory through steadiness. That is the kind of person I want to become. Someone quiet, understanding, unwavering. Someone who doesn't let the outer world stir the winds within. Because within that silence is a growing wisdom, one that doesn't need to shout to be heard, only to be present. If you found this content valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next video. In a world full of noise, you don't need to shout. You only need to be still enough to make the world listen. See you in the next video.